We're continuing on in Second Peter chapter 1. We're looking at things every week of what we can add to our faith. Just as a refresher, as Peter said to the church, for this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance. We're looking at perseverance this week. Now, if I were to ask you what perseverance meant, most of us would be able to give a pretty easy definition of that. It's not like, what does godliness mean? We might need a little refresher on that. But when it comes to what is perseverance, we can all think of different people who have persevered in different ways and have done some amazing things. I'm going to read a story to you. A little country schoolhouse was heated by an old-fashioned pot-bellied coal stove. A little boy had the job of coming to school early each day to start the fire and warm the room before his teacher and his classmates arrived. One morning they arrived to find the schoolhouse engulfed in flames, and they dragged the unconscious little boy out of the flaming building more dead than he was alive. He had major burns over the lower half of his body and was taken to a nearby country hospital. From his bed, the dreadfully burned, semi-conscious little boy faintly heard the doctor talking to his mother. The doctor told his mother that his son would surely die, which was the best, really, for the terrible fire had devastated the lower half of his body. But the brave boy didn't want to die. He made up his mind that he would survive, and somehow, to the amazement of the physicians, he did survive. When the mortal danger was past, he again heard the doctor and his mother speaking quietly. The mother was told that since the fire had destroyed so much flesh in the lower part of his body, it would almost be better if he had died, since he was doomed to a lifetime crippled with no use of all of his lower limbs. Once more, the brave boy made up his mind. He would not be a cripple. He would walk. But unfortunately, from the waist down, he had no motor ability. His thin legs just dangled there, all but lifeless. Ultimately, he was released from the hospital, and every day his mother would massage his little legs, but there was no feeling, no control, nothing. Yet his determination that he would walk was as strong as ever. When he wasn't in bed, he was confined to a wheelchair. And one sunny day, his mother wheeled him out into the yard to get some fresh air. This day, instead of sitting there, he threw himself from the chair. He pulled himself across the grass, dragging his legs behind him. When he worked his way to the white picket fence bordering their lot, and with great effort, he raised himself up to the fence. Then, stake by stake, he began dragging himself along the fence, resolved that he would walk. He started to do this every day until he wore a smooth path all along the yard beside the fence. There is nothing he wanted more than to develop life in those legs. Ultimately, through his daily massages, his iron persistent, and his resolute determination, he did develop the ability to stand up, then walk haltingly, then to walk by himself, and then to run. He began to walk to school, then to run to school, to run for the sheer joy of running. And later in college, he made it on the track team. Still later, in Madison Square Gardens, this young man was not expected to survive, who would surely never walk, who could never hope to run. This determined young man, Dr. Glenn Cunningham, ran the world's fastest mile. On June 16th, 1934, Glenn Cunningham ran the mile in 4 minutes, 6 seconds, breaking the world's record. His effort portrays that whatever you want to create in your life is yours for the making. As long as you desire it enough and allow your will to guide you, you can have and be whatever your heart desires. The only one that can put limits on your personal will is ourselves. Develop and encourage your will to create all the forces of nature within and without will help you to bring your desires come to pass. Amazing story of a young man whose will was so great that he was told, it would have most likely been better if you had died. Just imagine hearing those words. You're better off dead. But he had the determination and he was persevered through it that he was going to do something with those legs. And he becomes the man who runs the fastest mile ever ran in history. Wow. There's lots of different ways that we can look at perseverance. Newt Gingrich said this: perseverance is a hard work you do after you get tired of doing the hard work you already did. We can think of other people. When I think of perseverance, I think one of the first person that comes to my mind is Terry Fox. A young man that was determined. And each day he would get out and put his leg on and he would run a marathon. Every day. And he had so much perseverance in him that he was determined he was not going to quit. And sadly, when he almost got to Thunder Bay, the cancer took over. But everyone looks at his life and his legacy that's left behind him of what he was able to do because he had so much perseverance in his life and how he's even been able to change what people think of cancer today. And still, every second weekend in September, all across Canada, there's a Terry Fox run in order to raise money because of one man's perseverance. If you want to read about other people who persevered through time, you can think about Abraham Lincoln, an amazing man that over and over and over just had defeat after defeat after defeat, losing his wife, losing businesses, not being voted in. I'm sure Billy could remember a lot of the different dates. But it wasn't until he was 51 that he was finally awarded to be the president and the commander-in-chief of the United States. And some would say, well, why do you keep trying? Why do you keep, you're not going to make it as a senator. You're not going to make it as a governor. You're not going to make it as whatever. You just keep losing. But he persisted. He became one of the best presidents that ever lived in the United States, changing the whole demographics of that nation. We can think of Nelson Mandela, a man who for 27 years was jailed because of his color. Because of the color of his skin, because he was not the right color, he gets put in jail because he's fighting for his own rights. And he gets out, and because of his peace, because of his persistence, he becomes the president, the prime minister of South Africa. Thomas Edison. It's interesting. You look at the different things that he was able to invent. We have light bulbs today. These aren't the same light bulbs that he did. He didn't invent LEDs, but he did invent the light bulb. He was asked one day by a reporter, well, how do you answer to all the times that you failed? Haven't you failed over 1,000 times? And he says, I will not say that I failed 1,000 times. I just know 1,000 ways not to do it now. He was persistent. Everyone knows this one. I think I can. think I can. I think I can. And we teach it to our kids about the little train that thought he could and thought he could. And we teach that to our kids because we want to teach them and instill in them a persistence to keep going and keep doing. Let's be honest, we live in a world that some of the time it just kicks our teeth in, bullies us, tells us we're no good, tells us that we're not going to be able to do anything, that we won't amount to anything. And how can we be persistent in that? And here, what Peter is saying, I want you to add to your faith persistence. I don't want you to give up. We don't have to look very far to people who sadly have given up on their faith. People who it's just not important anymore. People who have been hurt. People who have gone through something in their life and it's just shipwrecked their faith in a terrible way. And we can say, if you'd only persevered through the hard time, if you'd only relied and went back to your faith. And I think that's really where what Peter's talking about is where it starts, is our faith is the crucial point, what our base is, what our foundation is. And if our faith isn't strong, there's no way that we're ever going to want to attain any knowledge. There's no way that we're ever going to have self-control in our life. There's no way that we're ever going to be able to add all these different building blocks to our life, and especially with perseverance. Why would we persevere if there's nothing to be thankful for, if there's not any blessings coming from it? But when we take a hard look at what our faith is all about and the hope that we have because of our faith, it's then that we can be persistent in the way that we live our life. It's interesting when Peter says, I want you to make every effort. I want you to strive at this. I want you to just not think about it, okay, well, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be. Make every effort to add to your faith these building blocks, these qualities in your life. And as I say, I don't have to describe or give you a definition of what perseverance is in any way whatsoever. We all see it. And, I share different stories or bring up different names. And it reminds us of those who were perseverant. I want to just read some scriptures here that will remind us. And some of the time, the best thing that a preacher can do is just shut up and just read the word. And let the Spirit work through the reading of that word to convict us, to challenge us, to teach us, to instruct us. So I'm going to read some things, and then what I'm going to do is we're going to look at the life of Paul. We're going to close off with him today and see if he was a persistent man or not. We all know what the answer to that is, but I want us to look at what his life of persistence looked like. James says this in James chapter 1. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Now, that does not make any sense in any way whatsoever. I want you to just think it's great that you're going through all the trials that you're going through. And he says, why? Because he goes on, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. It's as a parent, if we always protect our child from not going through any hardships, we're not giving them justice. They need to be able to go through some tough times and understand, the world is going to sometimes not treat you the way that you want to be treated. We live in a society now that, if a kid wants to play soccer, he's not allowed to lose. That there's no penalties. That, there's no repercussions. It's just like, but when you get out into the real world and you start working for somebody and they fire you and you find out, well, that's not right. You're not allowed to fire me because there's no loser. We live in a real world that we are going to face trials. It's not if you face trials, it's whenever you face trials. And we all have trials. There's all kinds of trials we go through. It could be health trials, it could be family trials, it could be job trials, it could be financial trials. There's all kinds of trials, and every single one of us is going to, at one point in our life, going to go through trials. And he's saying, consider it pure joy, because this is going to make your faith and make your faith stronger, and it's going to teach you how to persevere. He goes on, let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. What would have happened if that boy, Glenn Cunningham, just said, you know what, I'm content with just making a rut in the front of my mother's yard? He wasn't content with that. He was determined that he was going to walk. And he persisted. And I'm sure that some of the time when the kids walked by the yard, it's like, what are you doing, Limpy? I'm sure he got teased. I'm sure he wasn't, and his mother would be like, you know, maybe you need to get your head straight here. You need to understand, you're never going to walk here, Glenn. No. He was persistent. Paul says this to the church in Romans. Be joyful in hope. That's easy. But then he says, patient in afflictions. And then he adds, faithful in prayer. Joyful in hope, patient in afflictions, and constantly praying. I think that if we could learn those steps in all the things that we go through and add prayer, how much more persistent would we be? Paul gives this admonition to the church in Thessalonica. As for you, brothers and sisters, never tire in doing what is good. You know, some of the time it's just tiring. It's just like, man, I feel like I want to give up. It's just like, but he gives them the admonition and says, I don't want you to give up in doing good. Don't tire in doing good. I want you to be able to see the benefits. I want you to see the blessings that there are in doing good. Don't give up. Every single one of us at one point in time will be challenged. And we'll have to make a decision. Am I going to continue with this? Am I going to give up? Am I going to let the sickness take over? Am I going to let the divorce take over? Am I going to let whatever it is, the relationship, whatever it is, the job loss, am I going to let that trump and take over? Or am I going to persevere and become stronger through it? You need to understand that if we don't give up, there will be a harvest. Paul says to the church in Galatia, verse 6, let's not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give.
Stop at a restaurant that he went along, they bring the sandwich on the bus. And his whole life he went on fighting everybody. At the end, he had his harvest.
Yep. There are all kinds of people that we can look at that went through huge adversity, and you'd be like, well, why would you just go in a hole and just, forget about it? It's just like, but no, we have people that have stood up and have said, you know what, I'm going to persevere. I'm going to keep going. I love what the writer in Hebrews talks about. He's just shared this whole chapter of the great hall of faith. Men and women who did great things because they had great faith and didn't give up. Men and women that had so many adversaries and were doing things that did not make any sense, but because of the faith that they started out with, there's something that they couldn't see but they knew was there, and they were like, okay, I believe in it, and so therefore I'm going to persevere and I'm going to get my goal. And then right after that, after sharing that whole chapter on these different people that did amazing things, he says this. He says, therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And then listen what he says. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. And how do we do that? By fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and then sat down at the right hand of God. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. We need to understand that the race that we're running is not a 100-yard dash. It's a marathon. It goes for our whole life. We can have spurts where we can do really, really well, and then some of the time we get tired and we might run off and veer off. And we don't persevere as hard as we need to. But the writer of Hebrews shares this whole chapter of men and women that did amazing things and uses them. Therefore, because we have such this great cloud of witnesses, these people that have gone before us and showed in their perseverance how they were able to do amazing things because of their faith in their God, do the same. Let's look at Paul really quickly and see what he was like in his perseverance with his relationship with his God. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul is talking to the church, and he's telling them, I've gone through some things. I've had some sufferings. I've had some things that I've had to go through because of my faith and because of the things that I've accepted about Jesus Christ in my life. And this is what he went through. Whatever anyone else dares to boast about, I'm speaking as a fool, I also dare to boast about. He says, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? He says, I'm out of my mind to talk like this. I am more. And listen to if this is somebody that has persevered. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, being flogged more severely, and being exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from the rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. When would you give up? Paul was so determined. And why? What did it go back to? His faith. His faith in Jesus. The day that Jesus met him on the road and said, Saul, why are you persecuting me? What have I done to you that you're you're out there and trying to destroy and discredit me. And he has a wild conversion. And he changes. Were there times that it was hard for him? Absolutely. Were there times that maybe he was like, well, am I able to do this? No, he had a resolution. He had a perseverance in his life that no matter what, he was going to do what was right. He talks in Philippians chapter 3. He says, but whatever were gains to me, I now consider a loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which is through faith. The righteousness that comes from God on the basis of faith. He says, I want to know Christ. Yes, to know the power of his resurrection and to participate in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow attaining to the resurrection from the dead. And then he says this, not that I've already attained all this, or that I've already reached my goal, but this is what I do. I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. Brothers and sisters, I consider myself not yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and pressing toward that which is ahead. I press on towards the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. Forgetting what is behind and pressing toward that which is ahead. What would Paul have to forget about? Paul was the one that stood there when Stephen, the first martyr for Christ, was stoned. He held his cloak. And I wonder when he visited churches, what it was like when he'd walk in and people were like, what's he doing here? I know what he did to my parents. I know what he did to my sister. I know what he did to, he was the guy that took them and put him in jail. What's he doing here? There would have been a hush. In every town, every church that he would walk into, he would have to live with the memory of what he had done by persecuting Christians. But what he does is he doesn't wallow in that. Well, woe is me, I really can't do much. No. He forgot what was behind and pressed toward what? Because of his faith that he had in Jesus Christ. Faith that he was going to receive something that was out of this world, that he was going to receive a prize, that he was going to receive his reward, that if he persevered, he would be with Jesus in heaven. His faith was based on that, and his life was based on that. He comes to the end of his life. And he's been mentoring this young man, Timothy, and he gives Timothy some instruction of what he needs to do as an evangelist, of how he's supposed to take care of his ministry and what he's supposed to do. And then he says this to Timothy. He says, I'm being poured out like a drink offering, and the time of my departure is near. I'm getting ready to die here, Timothy. But this is what I've done in my life. I have fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. Basically, he's saying, Timothy, I persevered through it all. And because I persevered, this is what's in store for me: a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. Why was Paul able to say that I have an assurance that I'm going to be with Jesus? Because he persevered. He fought the good fight. He finished the race. And now, because of that, in store for me is something that which is just out of this world. The writer in Hebrews gives a long admonition. It's a call for us to persevere in our faith. And I'll close with this. Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain, that is his body, and since we have a great high priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience, and having our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess. For he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. If we deliberately keep on sinning after we received a knowledge of the truth, no sacrifice for sins is left, but only a fearful expectation of judgment and of raging fire that will consume the enemies of God. Anyone who rejected the law of Moses died without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much more severely do you think someone deserves to be punished who has trampled the Son of God underfoot, who has treated as an unholy thing the blood of the covenant that sanctified them, and who has insulted the Spirit of grace? For we know him who said, "It is mine to avenge, I will repay." And again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a dreadful thing to fall in the hands of the living God. Remember those earlier days after you received the light when you endured such a great conflict full of suffering? Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You suffered along with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property because you knew that you yourself had a better and lasting possessions. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. For in just a little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith. And I take no pleasure in the one who shrinks back. But we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith and are saved. Add to your faith perseverance. Don't give up. God is with us. God will guide us. God will direct us. We have his word. We have prayer. We have each other. Be able to persevere And to be able to say, hopefully at the end of our life, I have finished the race, I have fought the good fight. Now there's in store for me a crown of righteousness that he will reward to those who are faithful.